Hey, Geekscape, we are here with Dan Laskowski and Ryan Petrullo of the Weird Visions Society. This is one of the craziest anthology films I've seen in a long time. I was getting so many little bits and pieces of influence while watching it, but also it being so undeniably a unique original vision at the same time. But I I was watching this and I'm like, this is like street trash meets Giallo films. Like that
We'll
was
take
like
that. We'll take that.
like
Yes, we will.
I was so blown away by this. So what is
Thank
the
you.
story? Where did this stem from? Obviously, with Ryan and now I'm finding out with Dan, I have these mutual friends who are all very creative artists in their own world. So it kind of makes sense that you two would also rise up and become these incredible visual artists as well. But how did this all start?
Dan, you want to give the genesis there?
Basically, Ryan and I have known each other since college and have always been into, the same kind of stuff. And I'd say what really kind of moved in this direction for us was back in, what was it, 2020? That's when we really started hunkering down and basically watching, at least two horror movies a week together and finding kind of a sweet spot that we both really loved. This, 80s horror, creature feature, a lot of slime, low budget, kind of where it started. And I think eventually it was just like, hey, like we could make one of these, like we know what we like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you get 300, sci-fi horror movies deep, and you eventually watch so many bad films that you're like, we could at least make a bad movie. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Luckily, you made a very good movie, but yes.
Thank you. We appreciate that. But we were so, Dan and I are lifelong horror fans. We also used to live together a while back, and so we would watch, horror and sci-fi all the time. And oh yeah, over the last 4 years, just with Italian horror like Luigi Cozzi films and Fulci films, and then just like those very straight to video movies from like Full Moon Pictures and things like shot on video
I was going to say,
movies from the
there's some
80s.
shot
And
on video aesthetic hardcore in this movie.
yeah, well,
Um,
even though it's like filmed in 4K, we wanted it to still be like have that feeling of being a shot on video, very homemade. Obviously all of the prop, it's like the monster suit's got a zipper in the back. Like we embrace that kind of DIY sort of aesthetic.
It look when I say that this was such an awesome journey to watch, I think the words that kept coming to me were ambient, right? Like this is an ambient horror movie, which is a weird combination of words to use, but I feel like you created this film that is a hodgepodge of all these amazing ideas and concepts, and it's not like you can point it's not like you're sitting and you're like, "Oh, this is just like Zombie." You're like, "No, this is
Mm,
just like a Giallo film, but not like
mm,
any Giallo film that's ever existed. It just has the aesthetic and the feel of a Giallo film or a shot on video film. Like it has these aesthetics, but it's like just this mood. Like I almost feel like you guys have crafted a perfect, like if you want it to. Now this is November, but like someone could just put this on their TV for a Halloween party and it would be so effective as just this constant shifting collage of visuals and sounds, and it's such a mood based film, which is really, I think, harder to do than anything else because you're manipulating emotions with very little dialogue. Like
yeah,
it's
right.
just with sounds and visuals. You're like telling a story for large chunks of it, and
Yeah.
I was so floored by how like precise and well done that was
Oh, thank you.
throughout. Because there's a world where it could be really like, we've all watched those movies where you're like, no one's talked for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah, we knew that would be a risk. I mean, Dan and I love ambient music. We love, what we call sometimes like accidentally Lynchian moments in really bad 80s movies where, the shot is on the house for, just like 25 seconds too long, but it wasn't an intentional artistic decision. So we have always really loved those elements, and we're very cognizant of trying to kind of capture that magic. And thanks for your Halloween running in the background comment, because that was kind of at the heart of this. We really wanted something you could just put on in October and just have going on in the background. It's like, I mean, I think it's literally something that we mentioned at one point, which is why there's so many different kind of stories and subgenres.
I think I heard you say this on a different podcast on the network. You were on Analog Jones talking about this at one point, and it was a while ago, so I may have this wrong, but is all of the dialogue ADR'd?
Yeah, Dan, you want to talk about that at all?
I love the
The
aesthetic of that. Like, I love
the
the
audio
aesthetic of
in
that.
post.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had started at one point attempting to write sort of this thesis statement on like audio displacement and kind of it becoming its own character in a movie like this. And it's something I feel like I need to flesh out more, but it's just kind of I guess, a little bit along those Lynchian lines again, but like having all the dialogue and all the audio done in post, it kind of creates this additional character. And for me, it makes it kind of a more slippery, slimy, organic film, because it's like the dialogue's not lining up. Every sound you're hearing is that's not the stream that we recorded. It's a different water source that we maybe recorded. Or so it just kind of plays with your imagination, I think, a little bit, and it just adds something. And it's something that Ryan and I both have loved watching, especially Italian horror, where everything's, audio done in post. It just gives it this extra layer for me, this extra crusty, sludgy layer, which I like.
Yeah.
1000%. That, I mean, to me, I felt like it was definitely pulling from that Italian horror vibe while I was watching it. There's so many of these, especially I'm a big shark exploitation fan, so like, God, does Italy have plenty of like giant alligator and shark movies. And you're watching these movies that are like almost a fully American cast, and whether they're interior or exterior, like the voice is definitely done in post. Like it's
Oh, right.
like it's
Yeah.
off just enough, but it's like part of the charm. And
Yeah.
this being so intentional made it even more charming, but also like I feel like Syntronics is where it's at its most obvious, right? Because there's
Hmm.
so many interior stuff, but it works so well within the story of like from the second this person walks onto this office floor, something's clearly off about this place. And
Yeah.
having like all of the voices be also just like feeling slightly off because of that record in post, just like
Yeah.
further builds that suspense. Like it weirdly works as a suspense tool in that particular story.
Yeah, I mean, we just, yeah, feel like audio and post, it forces you to pay attention to the audio as a separate layer, as opposed to when you're clearly watching dialogue or sound effects that are happening and filmed in the moment. But we wanted to do it in earnest. We didn't want it to be tongue in cheek, because there are plenty of movies that kind of poke fun at that, and we don't it's not really meant to be humorous for us. We just really think it's kind of this beautiful little thing that now, in hindsight, looking back on, these 70s and 80s Italian movies, it's just a whole other artistic layer that we wanted to toy with.
Now, how would as much as I'm looking at it like this is a brilliant concept, how hard was it to kind of sell on the actors to be like, all right, you're going to act out this scene, and then at an undetermined amount of time later, we're going to have to bring you back in to now re-record all of this, and also you have to make sure it perfectly syncs up with what you were saying previously.
I would say, luckily, none of these actors were paid. None of, no,
Luckily.
Not yet.
um,
The checks got lost in the mail.
most of the people involved in this are not real actors. They're people we know. This was a very low budget film. Dan and I both just each paid everything. It was like half and half for us. It being so low budget, everyone just kind of blindly accepted whatever we were telling them. Like, hey, so don't even worry about getting your lines right, because we're going to record those later. And, you know, for Heirloom, which is the little girl who goes to her grandma's house, and her grandma ends up, not being exactly what you'd think a grandma is. We recorded her lines a year after we filmed her. And because she was so young, Lily, her name's Lily Vasquez, her voice had changed. It had gotten a little bit lower. And so we had to, we're friends with her dad, and we had to kind of have her like pretend to be a little child again.
Are you looking forward to staying over at Grandma's house?
Yes, I've always wanted to spend the night at Grandma's.
And so there was all these kinds of little,
But
hoops you had to
again,
jump through.
it works. It works in that like Bob from House in the Cemetery kind of way. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
it like
yeah.
still feels like, no, this feels like this is correct for what the tone and the inspiration is. Like, of course, the child's voice would feel slightly off than a child's voice. Like that's
Yeah.
just par for the course in that. I want to talk about the visuals a little bit though. Like the
Sure.
audio stuff is really cool, but the visuals are, I think, what's going to sell people to just have this in their house on a VHS, ready to go all year round, but definitely for Halloween. Like you said, it's goopy, but it's also just like it's in a color palette that I'm not used to seeing. And that's
Yeah.
what I love so much about it, is it's so vibrant with its colors. Like,
Mm.
as much as I say that it reminds me of shot on video films, this looks a million times better than your traditional
Sure.
shot on video film. Like, but it's just it has that aesthetic to it, but this is like watching paintings move in real time.
Oh, thanks.
So I mean, what went into, like, even just when we see the Weird Vision Society lapping up slop before each story, like that's all so colorful and not what you would expect for a
Mm.
horror movie, right? Like, horror movies are blues and blacks, and this is like bright greens and reds and a whole canvas.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ryan and I both have that similar sort of interest in some of those day glow neon freak out 80s horror movies that, you mentioned Street Trash, which is certainly a touch point. And I think for my part, coming to this being a visual artist already, and already liking to work with paint and working with making abstract video art and upping that stuff, that for me was really important, where it was like, let's make every composition what we want. None, like, everything has to be perfect for what we're looking for,
Mm.
where we can like get as much slime in there as we can, get the close-ups, get beautiful location shots, and get the colors right. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jodorowsky was another kind of influence that, he's not necessarily horror in the traditional sense, but we have always really adored his visual style, and obviously that's a very high point to try and reach, but that was one of the decisions that kind of led us to make with the slime dimension, where all the robed humanoids are against like a yellow background with kind of like bright psychedelic visuals in the back. It seemed obvious for us to kind of make the whole thing, black sheets and stuff, and a little bit more classic satanic vibes, but we just thought it would be fun to make it a little brighter and more, engaging in that way.
And then not just color too, but texture is incredibly important to us. And I'd say Tetsuo is a touch point there, where although that's black and white, just having the texture really scream on the screen is something that I think we both thought was really important to get. So that's why you've got your close-ups and you've got these different shots that, like, that's what we're going for lots of times, is like, let's get that texture in there.
No, I can 1,000% see that as well. It's just one of those things where there's not, just by nature, like I said, horror films are a lot of blacks and blues and shadow, and there's barely really anything that's happening at night in this. So much of it is in broad daylight, and that's not, there's a reason why horror people don't do that, is that it's hard to do something scary and effective and interesting in daylight, and you guys nailed it 5 times in a row, plus a great wraparound. Like,
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what, the second half of Astrofiends is at night, and
Yeah.
that was it's it's a unique challenge to film at night, and you need a lot of lamps on everybody, because otherwise everything is going to be gritty and not in a cool way. So we had people like four people walking around with lights, moving with people, and it was a pretty unique challenge. And besides that, I mean, you know, I think in Obelisk, Dan, we had the attic scene, which was at night.
Yeah.
But the another one of the big challenges was Centronics. All of the interior shots we filmed. We built a room basically. Two of our friends did the production design on that, where they painted these like huge. What were those made of? It was like basically we made walls black, and then just like filled it with neon light and little trinkets and technological oddities, and you know tried to find a balance between the color and darkness.
There's a lot of, now that we're talking about it, and I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier when watching it. The coloring and the lighting and everything also just gives a lot of like Hausu to me, that like very vivid but like abstract, and like I think it's very easy for people to look at Hausu and just be like, look at this weird dumb movie, but it's a beautifully made movie.
Mhm.
House is
Like
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a movie that like those visuals will rest in your brain forever. And it's like there's so many shots in this film that I watched it this morning. Here we are 12 hours later, and I'm still just sitting here thinking about like, this is going to sound weird, but like the gorgeousness of like pus coming out of an eyeball, or like
Mm.
like there's it you weirdly found you found a weird beauty with some of the most disgusting things that you could put on film, but shot it in such a beautiful way, and then intermixed it with I'm jealous that I didn't get to experience the sound effect portion of this,
Mm.
because you just found the right gross sounds for everything. But
Yes.
it is like, I really think this film is a true work of art, and it's interesting because it's coming out the same year that In a Violent Nature comes out, right? And like that also
Yeah.
was aiming for an ambient aesthetic. I think I'm preferring your guys' take on ambient aesthetic over that movie, because you held in, you just kept, I felt like every single point I thought, all right, they've challenged themselves as far as they can go. Like the next segment starts, I'm like, no, this is their, every single story feels like you both were pushing yourselves creatively as far as you could possibly go. Was it always these five stories, or were there earlier stories that you were just like, no, we could do something better than this, and you kept like kind of pushing yourselves?
Some of the stuff we knew right away, some of it definitely grew organically, and some of it got more and more complex kind of as we went, like in a fun way. The first thing that we filmed was Sludge Freak, and I think at first it was pretty much like, okay, Dan's gonna play every character, and we're just gonna like make a feature length movie, is what it. But then it just kind of built, and it was like, well, let's add some more actors in here, so it doesn't have to be like Dan as the monster, cut to Dan as the actor. So, kind of allowed us to get more and more complicated with things. But I think for both of us, and I love that you caught this is and are commenting on it, is that the feel of it being like an ambient horror film was always very important to me, and it being about like a vibe, and like not just an homage to these movies that we love in this very particular niche, but like adding something to that. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of going all over the place here. But yeah, it kind of like grew organically as we went, pretty much.
Were the stories, obviously films are not usually shot chronologically, but it's interesting to me that you mentioned that Sludge Freak was the first one you did, and it's the first one in the story, because I feel like, yeah, I kind of could have guessed that from watching Sludge Freak, which I enjoyed, but as the movie progressed, I'm like, oh, I almost felt like I was watching your concept progress with each story, were the stories shot kind of chronologically to how they showed up, or was that just a happy accident that Sludge
Um,
Freak's the first one?
Partially, we decided pretty early what the order would be of them, but our last month of shooting would be like Grandma Face Melts from
Yeah,
number 2, and then Spaceship from number 4,
yeah.
and Death Scene from number 5, and then something. So we had a lot of spaces to fill, and so our filming schedule for this. I mean, it took us 3 years to make, which
Damn.
is
Okay.
a slow pace, but we both working full-time jobs and funding it ourselves. But Sludge Freak, that's what we cut our teeth on. That was the first thing we ever did. That was our first time going into a space with a camera. Dan basically made up all those lines on the spot, that the bog scientist says, and the guy, Albert, uh,
Oh,
yeah, he was supposed to play the Sludge Freak, and then he bailed the last minute. And Dan's like, I guess I'm just gonna play both characters, and we just got we just kind of cut back and forth between Dan killing himself, and but we knew we wanted a swampy bog short. We knew we wanted a sort of gothic house, haunted house kind of feeling one. We definitely wanted some sort of sci-fi Tetsu inspired piece. We came up, I don't know how we came up with the Giallo sci-fi crossover, but we were really excited about doing some sort of cabin mixed with Giallo. And then we just really wanted a gothic cemetery piece. And that kind of grew organically as to include all of these, visions of death. And then the wraparound was the kind of the last thing we did. And that was actually a huge hassle, a huge production, because we had to convert my parents' garage into that space. And it was also, New Jersey was experiencing a flood that day, and
perfect.
the water came within, I don't know, like a millimeter to like flooding my parents' garage. We had to like cancel the whole thing. But
That's wild. So you guys did your big premiere. It's now available on a VHS tape, right?
it's a Lunchmeat VHS.
Lunchmeat
Yeah,
VHS. Yeah.
and so it's a if you watch that if you have like a 90s CRTV or like an 80s era like box TV, it just looks, I would say, visually the exact way that we kind of envisioned. It's a much different experience, obviously, than what you watched, which was the widescreen kind of high def version. But this is the VHS version is also kind of a beautiful little take on it.
Do you have plans for what happens from this point? Are you looking at streaming options? Are you trying to do more film festivals? What's
Uh,
the next steps for you guys?
with Weird Vision Society, we just kind of want it to see as many people to see as possible. We'll probably start talking about streaming next year, early next year, like January, February. And we already started working on writing some new stuff. So our next project will be a feature length. So we're just kind of honing in on what that's going to look like.
Well, I am excited. I'm officially all in on whatever projects you guys have. I
Thank you,
hope you
Matt.
I hope you both know you're now officially friends of the entire Geekscape network. So whenever you
Hell
need
yeah.
anything promotion wise, we're here for you.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me.
We really appreciate it, Matt, and thanks for having us on and for all the kind words.
Yeah, seriously, really appreciate it.